When it comes to state, input elements are somewhat special. In general, everything that can change in the UI should be part of the state. Now, if we include a so-called uncontrolled input element, that would not be the case. React does not know the input's content and cannot change it. But we can create so-called controlled inputs, which are connected to the state. Here we start off with an uncontrolled input. I will now add a state entry and connect it to the state. The first part will be just defining the state entry as we've done before. Now I'm going to connect that state with the input elements in two directions. First, the current state entry from the React component should be displayed in the rendering. Second, if the user changes the text, the corresponding state entry should be updated. I'm going to start with the first binding from the component state to the rendering. If I assign value equals input text, what is displayed to the user will always be the current state entry. Which means for now, I can't type anything into the input field. Its content will always be an empty string. To add back some interactivity, I'm now going to add a binding in the other direction. If a user types, the state should be updated. And I'm going to do that by adding an onChange event handler function. And inside that function, I will call the state setter with the new value of the input. I'll show you how I can access the new value of the input, and I'll explain it afterwards when the code is complete. Here my event handler function receives an event parameter, which represents the change event. Event.target will be a reference to the input element itself. And event.target.value will be the new value of the input element. I now have an input field that is connected to the state in two directions. I can make use of that by adding some more functionality. For example, here I'm displaying a dynamic text that counts the number of characters, and I've added a reset button that resets the content to an empty string. Let's take a look at different types of inputs we can use in HTML. I will show you how to use single and multi-line text inputs, checkboxes, and numeric inputs. For other inputs, you can read up on their use in the official documentation. Here we see the basic example for a text input, which also works in this way for text area inputs. For checkboxes, the property we're using is not value, but checked, which is a Boolean. We have to consider this when binding in both directions, so here and here. For numeric inputs, my basic advice is store the content as a string, not as a number. The reasoning for that is, while the user types, there can be input contents that are not representable as a number, or that are not distinguishable. For example, an empty string or a minus sign are not valid numbers. And the last three example strings here represent the same number. As an exercise, you can create a very simple newsletter sign-up interface. Here's what the finished result could look like. There are three inputs with very simple validation. The first input just has to have an @ sign in it. The second input has to match the first one. and the third input has to be checked. Based on the status of all inputs, I can enable or disable the sign up button. In JSX, I can disable or enable a button by assigning a Boolean value to its disabled property. If you have questions or comments, or you want to share your results, you can do so in the comments of this video.